Hey folks, John Ferguson Smart here. Why do a lot of teams have trouble getting into test automation and getting test automation to work? One simple way of looking at it is that the whole idea of test automation, it creates difficulty. The whole concept of test automation puts you in a position that you're basically setting yourself up for failure. What do I mean by that? Well, the idea of test automation is that you're automating your tests. If you want to automate your tests, you need to create your tests first. You need to come up with your test scripts, imagine your test scenarios, write them out, document them, and so forth. And you do that. To do that, you need to study your requirements or have your application that works, and then go through and figure out how you're going to test the application. Now, that's all fine if you're in a waterfall context and you're doing things in a siloed fashion and you have heaps of time and you're doing things old school, but in an agile context, that doesn't work. And in fact, the whole concept of automating your tests is a little bit backwards in an agile setting. In an agile project, a much more efficient way of thinking is, well, what are tests for? They're to give you confidence that the application satisfies the requirements. Okay, so let's go back to the requirements. What are the requirements? Well, they're what comes from our user stories, what we derive from our user stories. They're not the user stories themselves. They are the needs of the users that the users express as user stories. So that is a little bit subtle, but when we have our user stories, we get acceptance criteria for those user stories. And what's an acceptance criteria? It's a list of points, a list of things that we need to demonstrate to show that our story works. Now, if we can take those acceptance criteria and make them as automated as possible, then what we are effectively doing is automating our acceptance criteria, which is a much more efficient approach than figuring out what tests we need to do to check these acceptance criteria and then automating those tests. Now, if we automate our acceptance criteria, the next step is saying, well, how can we go about making those acceptance criteria as visible as possible to give the whole team, the stakeholders, the business folk, the product owners, everyone involved, as much confidence as possible. We want to write the acceptance criteria in a way that is not only an automated test that can be executed, but also that acts as documentation that demonstrates how our software works and what our software is supposed to do. So demonstrating how it works, that's easy enough, but demonstrating also what the software should do, that's a bit of an art. And that's where the concept of living documentation comes into play, where we try and articulate our requirement in a way that's both readable to the business and that can be executed. And then the third step is we take those requirements that we've articulated and we figure out the fastest, most efficient, most direct way to automate them. And that may be through the UI, maybe through APIs, maybe directly calling code, it may be wiring up Spring Boot services, it may be calling REST APIs through JavaScript. There are lots of different ways of demonstrating a particular acceptance criteria that will depend on your application. But it's not a one-size-fits-all thing. It's something that you talk about before you start your work. And once you can do that, you talk about that with your developers, with the team, you get a much faster, much more direct route to having these acceptance criteria automated. And you don't have to worry about test automation because everything that you're interested in is automated already as acceptance criteria. So that, in a nutshell, in a very, very compressed way, is how you go from traditional test automation after the fact, automating your manual tests, to actual agile test automation, where you are automating your acceptance criteria and articulating your acceptance criteria in a way that they can give the most confidence possible. So that's basically what I wanted to talk about today. Thanks for listening, folks.